Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, and this is episode 601, one of the second of two shows this week. I was unable to find a Packers guy to do a podcast with, and I will tell you, Seth Cox, who is from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, my co-host. It is, I don't know what it is, Seth, but I have the hardest time anytime the Cardinals play the Packers, whether it's before the season or during the season, to get someone who will talk about them on a podcast. Do Packers people not podcast? I don't know.
They only podcast with each other, Jess, so it makes it difficult. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because they're a deep fan base. They have a lot of different avenues, but it seems like they're very insulated in those in where they share those information with, right?
Yeah, it seems that way. Like normally my guys on my network are all very, very willing, and I can barely track down my Packers people. It's like well, the Packers guys like, hey, we're going to exchange questions, right? Yeah. You want to come on the podcast? Not even a response. I don't know. But so Seth and I will do the job of previewing the Cardinals-Packers, and we will get no Packers perspective at all. So you guys get to hear what we think, and that's going to be gospel. Isn't that basically what we're saying, Seth?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's you and I, and then we'll figure it out from there. And you know, it's an interesting week because the Packers in general are kind of a conundrum right now, and you and I were talking about it off the air, and it is going to be interesting to see how this game plays out because it's a little closer than most people would expect in terms of just the numbers across the board. Yeah. And the Packers at the same time have really, gotten by in some of these games with less than impressive wins. And that's kind of what makes this such an interesting matchup, is that they are, they're a very good offense. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And they had a great 2-game stretch with Malik Willis, but their guy Jordan Love is back. He's been okay this year. He hasn't been what they had hoped coming out.
He's kind of like what he was at the beginning of last year. It was the second half of the year that he just became godly in his play. He was so productive and so careful with the football. But the first few games, it looked like, oh, I guess we should have kept Aaron Rodgers. But
well, not just that, but it's not even the keeping of things. It's, like you said, this last year, maybe we should have kept Aaron Rodgers. And then this year, it's like, should we have made him one of the highest paid players in NFL history? Like, that's the crazy thing. And you look at it, they're 3-2, and we're not big on the quarterback wins type of questionnaire, but they're 1-2 with Love, 2-0 with Malik Willis, but those numbers tell a bigger story. And obviously the numbers are skewed, right? Like,
yes,
you just look
wins, not impressed because they're against the 2-3 Colts, the 1-3 Titans, and the 1-4 Rams. That's not to say winning those games isn't a bad thing, but they've lost to the Eagles and they lost to the Vikings. The Eagles, not that great. The Vikings obviously are fantastic. And so they're playing, the Packers overall are playing like a middling team right now.
Well, and you look at it, like when Willis was in 2 games, he just threw the ball 34 times. Jordan Love in 3 games has thrown the ball 114 times. Now,
and
some
Geno
of that
Smith of the Seahawks threw it 52 times on Sunday.
Yeah. And some of those numbers are skewed. Obviously, you look at that Minnesota loss, as you mentioned earlier. They were down 28 to 7 at one point. or 28-0 at one point, 28-7 in the third quarter. And so all of a sudden, they had to throw the ball. So they threw, 54 attempts is a lot. So it wasn't a standard, game where he was throwing the ball or using that to throw the ball. It was more of like out of desperation, down 28-0, 28-7. Like, we got to throw the ball around, try to get this game back. And they made it close. I mean, 31-29 final score, but very inefficient game in and of itself. And that was his first game back. Throws 4 touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. And again, this is important because, 4 years, $220 million just is an absurd amount of money for any player. But to see them come out and do that, he hasn't completed over 60% of his passes in any games this season. That's significant when you consider how poorly, as we can, acknowledge, how poorly the Cardinals have defended the pass at times this season. Really outside of the Matthew Stafford game, last week was the first time that they've really done anything to a quarterback, right? I mean, and so they need to continue that pressure on Love. I mean, again, 3 games, so it is no, there's really no information at this point, but his 56% completion percentage is a career low. His 4.4% interception percentage is a career high. So we're talking about a guy that, last season threw the ball quite a bit, 32 touchdowns to only 11 interceptions. He's got 8 touchdowns right now, and he's got 5 interceptions. Again, 3 came in one game, but he's averaging over an interception a game, but he throws an interception a game. That's wild for a team that just paid this guy this much money. And so, and then you look at it, the best offensive player has probably been, the running back that they paid a ton of money to, Josh Jacobs, or potentially I think he's a third year, but I'm double checking right now, wide receiver or second year wide receiver, Jaden Reed, who, is on pace for over 1,000 yards this season. He's put up really good numbers. He's been kind of the guy. And since Love came back, he's, again, we kind of have to take the Minnesota game with a slight grain of salt with just the absurd amount of attempts, but he had 139 yards in that game. And then he followed up with 78 against the Rams. So, over 200 yards in those last 2 games that Love's been back. You compare that to his 2 games with Malik Willis where he had 59 total yards. So, he makes a huge difference for Reed in that, and that's something to keep in the back of your mind for when we get to our prop segment.
Yeah, and if there's one thing we can say that the Packers have done extremely well this year, defensively they take the ball away. They have had multiple takeaways in every game this season. 3 takeaways in week 1, 3 takeaways, 3 takeaways, 3 takeaways, and then 2 against the Rams. So they lead the NFL in takeaways with 14. And that is led by safety Xavier McKinney, who is having a crazy season. He has 5 interceptions. He's had 1 interception in every single game this season. And turnovers is important, and that's always a winning stat. For the success, you always wonder, can a team sustain taking the ball away that many times? Because turnovers, there's things you can do to create turnovers, but is that something, especially against a team like the Cardinals, we'll look at the matchup, is can they always expect to take the ball away? Because that seems anomalous and a little fluky in my mind.
Well, it depends on how they're coming and where they're coming, right? That's the biggest thing. So you look at the Minnesota game, right? And you go through how those series went, how that game was kind of flowing, and you look at it, the first 3 series went touchdown, 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 obviously for the Vikings. But 2 of those touchdowns came off interceptions that Jordan Love threw. Then they had a punt, and then they scored a touchdown again off a interception that Jordan Love threw. And then in the second half, you look at it, right? And you have an interception that opens up the game, but Minnesota moved the ball down the field with relative ease. I mean, that started out that, they had the ball at the 18 and they turned it over on the 20 on a 2nd and 1. They had 1 third down that whole drive. I mean, you look at it, a no gain, an incomplete pass, 3rd and 10. So you're like, okay, I got to get off the field here. You're down 28-7 and a 25-yard completion. It's like, whoa, is this the Cardinals defense? Right. Like, and then Aaron Jones, 16-yard run, Sam Darnold, 12-yard run, Aaron Jones, 9-yard run. So it's 2nd and 1. And they have they throw an interception on a great play by Xavier McKinney. It was a nice play. And, you look at that, that's just I don't want to say fluky, but is it, you haven't made a play all game. And you make this play, and then it was almost like it didn't matter. I mean, obviously 35-7 matters, but they went 3 and out right after that. I mean, run, incomplete pass, punt. So it wasn't as though it was this huge deal. And then the other one was, I think they had a fumble on a sack, and same type of deal, right? Again, is it fluky? No, it's a good play by Keyshawn Nixon to sack Sam Darnold, but it's not something that every time you get a sack, you're going to see a fumble, right? So I think to your point, what you're trying to say is like the amount of turnovers they're causing is not sustainable, but we've seen that there are teams that get on these runs in a season and they'll just have a lot of luck, which is what turnovers are a lot of times. Look back at the Chiefs Monday night game against the Saints, right? Kalen Sanders, we all love the thick 6 that he was going for, but it's not like Sanders did anything. I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster just didn't catch a ball. Like, it wasn't as though he did anything to earn that. So, it's one of those situations where, to your point, yeah, there's a lot of luck involved, but we have seen in years past that teams can go on runs where they cause a ton of turnovers. And then what typically happens with those teams, though, Jess,
they fade.
Is they fade. I think the Cardinals, even in 21, right?
They had a really big. When they were that start that they had, they were amazing at good taking the ball away, and then it faded. But for whatever reason, but like it goes in stretches. Like they're 3-2 with a +7 turnover ratio.
Right, which is to me the bigger concern, because here's the thing. They're not generating, easier to say. They're not generating a ton of quarterback pressures. And
they do have a decent amount of sacks. I will say that this year. They do have a number of sacks, guys doing it from all over the place. Devontae Wyatt leads the way with 3. Preston Smith are, if we think back, it's been in 8 years now. We're like, oh, Preston Smith should be a Cardinal. 2.5 sacks. They've got 1.5 from Carl Brooks, from Kingsley Enigbari, from Edgerrin Cooper. They've got 2 sacks from cornerback Keyshawn Nixon, 1.5 from Quay Walker. They're getting sacks from all over the place.
But again, is that
16 in 5 games?
Yeah, but again, is that something that is?
And what is that compared to their pressure rate? Because the Cardinals were getting sacks at the first half of last year, but they were turning almost all their pressures into sacks, and then they stopped getting pressure.
They have a decent pressure rate. It's the hurry rate that has been good. It's the QB knockdown or getting hits on guys, which is typically where you see those turnovers coming from. It's not so much the hurries that cause it. It's the them, quarterbacks taking a hit, and that's where they struggle. So it's not so, they're getting some hurries. They're top 10 in that. But like you said, the fact that they're top, I think 6 in sacks says a lot. But we'll see how it kind of plays out in terms of that, because one of the things with turnovers, like you said, is it's not about how many you cause. And that's the thing, like their turnover rate, you look at the turnover rate of like the top turnover rates, they're number 1 with the bullet, 23.2. So that's good. But they are middle of the pack in other things. And that's kind of where it comes from, right? Is that how are they going to make do when they're not causing turnovers? And
Right.
They haven't really shown yet how that's going to work. And that's, to me, what's going to be interesting, because when they're not winning the turnover battle, which they have for the most part, and like you said, they're only 3-2 with that. That's a tough one. The other thing is, like you said, the game, you look at the quarterbacks that they've played. Anthony Richardson has really, really struggled this year. He has not been good whatsoever for Indianapolis. And then they played
Will Levis.
Will Levis, and he's been terrible. And then, like you mentioned, it's we haven't seen the same thing from Matt Stafford this year. He hasn't been. He's had runs where he's looked fantastic, but he hasn't been as good consistently. So, those are the things. And then even like Jalen Hurts hasn't looked as good. So the best quarterback they've played has been Sam Darnold, which is
that's saying something. Sam Darnold's been great this year, but it's still Sam Darnold. I'm still waiting for Sam Darnold to be Sam Darnold. Let's be honest, aren't we all?
We definitely all are.
Because we know he's had that kind of talent. And when the Cardinals play the Vikings, we'll talk about that. We've known Darnold has this talent. He has the talent to be a top quarterback. But he always makes mistakes. And so unless he changed who he is as a player, it's going to come back. The running game is good. They have so far 824 rushing yards through 5 games, led by Josh Jacobs at 402 yards, 4.5 yards a carry. They've got
wasn't the decision to go to Jacobs, who I mean I think is fantastic, so I don't want to take anything away from that decision, but wasn't the decision to go to Jacobs, and I know they were not expecting AJ Dillon to be out for the year. Wasn't that kind of weird though, with Aaron Jones on board already? I know Jones was getting a little long in the tooth, and so they're like, we should probably move on. But I don't know. It just felt like an odd decision for a team that had a very good running back already.
Yeah, and I think it might simply be that, as simple as that. Aaron Jones is 30 this year. Josh Jacobs was 26, and if you wanted to maintain that sort of two-man running game, you go with a younger guy. And Josh Jacobs, in fairness, has been very good this year. Jonathan Gannon, when he spoke to the media this week about the Packers, pointed out 2 things. The Packers throw the ball over your head, so they have explosive pass plays, and they run the ball well. And they're one of the top teams in explosive play. So that's going to be a big challenge for the Cardinals. And so we look at how they are a top 5 offense in yards and top 8 in scoring. And so it's another very good offensive team. And then, but on top of that, but then they've turned the ball over 7 times. Well, granted, 4 was against the Vikings, but they've had turnovers in 4 of their 5 games this year.
Well, and you do, I mean, that's exactly right. But the other thing that you look at with this, right, is that you've got guys that are inherently flawed in their abilities. Obviously, outside of Jacobs, who's been, was he an All-Pro 2 years ago? I know he was close to an All-Pro a couple years ago. And then last year was slightly disappointing. Yeah, he was an All-Pro 2 years ago. Okay, I wasn't crazy. And then was slightly disappointing and kind of an injury-plagued, terrible overall season for the Las Vegas Raiders. Not anything Jacobs did, obviously. But 2 years ago, this is a guy that averaged almost 100 yards per game, just under 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns. But then you look at what he did in the passing game, and he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. He had a great season. Now, while he's slightly down from that pace overall, he is still a guy that's shown that he can be a great running back in this league. And then we mentioned Reed earlier. I mean, he's a guy that has looked the part this year. He looks like a guy that can do some things and cause some problems, kind of as that slot guy. But it's the other guys that ebb and flow with this team. Obviously, I don't know if fans are paying attention to the Romeo Doubs saga unless you have him in fantasy. Why would you, right? Like, it sounds callous, but who cares, right? Nobody really cares that Romeo Doubs doesn't like his role and has been suspended. So, but he's a guy that, he's their third leading receiver. Their second leading receiver is Tucker Kraft, who's starting to come into his own as a tight end. He's playing well. He's 120 some odd yards away from his career high in receiving yards, and then he's already surpassed his career high in touchdowns. So I mean, he's on pace to really do good things this year. Dontavian Wicks is one of the most explosive players in the NFL. I mean, he is just a freak of nature. He just has one kind of flaw, and that's he just can't catch. So so he's this.
Well, if he does, watch out.
Right. No, and we're joking, but we're not. Like, this is a guy that, I mean, look at these numbers. Just 3 targets, 0 receptions, 4 targets, 3 receptions. So not bad. 2 targets, 0 receptions, 13 targets, 5 receptions,
What the heck?
7 targets, 2 receptions. Like, he just doesn't catch the ball. Like, it's just not his strength, which is a wild thing to say about a wide receiver. But he's explosive and gets open. So like you said, if he is able to catch the ball, he causes a lot of problems. It's just not something he's done very much. And then you got Christian Watkins, who was the other, second round pick wide receiver they took. And he's just kind of every year dwindled in terms of what he's been. And then last week he missed with an injury. I don't know if he's still injured this week. I haven't checked the injury report. He was limited again with an ankle injury. But I mean, you look at what he's done through 4 games. I mean, 5 receptions for 80 yards. That's the expectation of a game for most wide receivers, right? Like 5 for 80. Like, that's what he has in 4 games on the season. Now, granted, he was injured in one of those, and I'll give him that. But the other 3, there's really no excuse. And so that's the thing with this offense, is that it looked really exciting last year, right? Jordan Love, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Tucker.
It could be
Tucker
anyone.
Kraft.
They were like, it could be anyone.
And now this year it's like, well, they got Josh Jacobs and Jaden Reed, and Tucker Kraft is getting there, and he's becoming a good tight end. So that's our offense. And so, yeah, it's just interesting that they're that efficient still, but a lot of it's just, a lot of bulk yards and losses. I mean, it's ironic that their 2 biggest yardage games are in their losses, right? Like to the Eagles and the Vikings. And that's just because they lack the efficiency in those games. Those are also, outside of last week, their two lowest rushing yards in games. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting because, like you said, this is a defense that's opportunistic. It's an offense that puts up a lot of pretty numbers, but they haven't been great, and that's what's interesting to me.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Series podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on and talk about the game itself. Let's talk about keys for the Cardinals, matchups we're going to be watching. That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Series podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, looking at the Cardinals-Packers matchup in Week 6 at Lambeau Field. Interesting thing to note is that I guess number one, when you look at perhaps that big number, and that's the turnover number that the takeaways that Green Bay has, and I think you have number one, you have to take care of the football. And the Cardinals, they have one turnover in every game, one turnover every single game. In general, they're a team that protects the football pretty well. Kyler Murray is not turnover prone. He does make mistakes once in a while, but that'll be an important thing to watch, because if they can keep it to one turnover, which is what no one else has done thus far against the Packers, every time you turn the ball over, that's a lost possession. You don't gain field position. It's not a punt, and so you're giving the ball back there. And so I guess key number one, don't turn the ball over. I mean, that's in general, but especially against the Packers, who have been so opportunistic. And you take all those turnovers away, those takeaways away from that Packers defense, you really look at, is it a great defense? Because in yardage, they are bottom 11. They're 21st in yards allowed. And obviously they're 14th in points allowed. Like, when you take the ball away that many times, you're not going to give up as many points. So if you can protect the football, you're going to be able to move the ball down the field. And they're pretty good against the run. James Conner, basically we know if the running game is going, the Cardinals offense is going to be good. They are 11th against the run, but 16th in yards per carry. And so this is kind of like last week with the 49ers. The 49ers gave it 4.1 per carry, and it looked like they had things shut down, but eventually James Conner ran them over. The Packers allow 4.4 yards per carry, and against a Cardinals team that does run the ball pretty efficiently, that might be a problematic thing for them.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be interesting for this whole matchup is, like you said, it's if the Cardinals can run the ball efficiently, they can force Green Bay to try to live and die with the big play. And this season, they haven't been able to do so. And so that'll be, limiting the big play and forcing Green Bay to play a full game is kind of where you want to be in that situation. The other thing you look at is, as you mentioned, with the turnovers, is you need this game for the Cardinals to be a game where, like you said, you can have a negative play here and there. That's not the worry. It's that you can't give up plays that result or allow the Packers to have short fields, to have the ability to get quick scores. Force them to do things from a elongated point of view, meaning that they're having to drive the length of the field, that they're having to go the length of the field consistently. If they beat you in that way, you tip your cap to them, right? Like, hey, we forced you to do everything, and do it the hard way, as opposed to getting short fields because of turnovers and things of that nature. You look at overall this team, Kyler obviously leads the team in fumbles, but you can't have fumbles from Wilson or Connor or Benson this week. Like, those guys can't fumble the ball. And then, like you said, Kyler just needs to continue to protect the ball when he has it, and not take chances until it's a necessity.
Right. I'm interested in seeing how the Cardinals match up on the edge. Preston Smith against Kelvin Beachum will be important. Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt against Tristan Colon is also going to be really important because guess what? New right guard. Tristan Colon wasn't terrible last year, but he definitely wasn't good. And he wasn't even good enough to fully replace Elijah Wilkinson, whom we all considered the weakest link on the Cardinals offensive line a year ago. And Colon was behind Wilkinson. So that particular matchup, whoever is lining up against Colon will be really important because Beachum in the games that he started, guess what? He's been pretty solid. He's been as good as we could have expected out of him. But the drop off from Hernandez to Colon, I want to see if that's noticeable.
Yeah, and how bad it is, because this is a huge one for this team, and they, we'll see how obviously Thursday Night Football goes. We discussed that just a little bit this week, and if the Cardinals end up winning on Sunday, there's a legitimate chance that they are the top team in.
We are rare 49ers fans this week. Well, tonight,
yeah.
Thursday night.
And so, there's this opportunity, let's say, that the Cardinals are atop the NFC West Sunday night, which is absurd. Nobody would have thought that, especially with the Cardinals being at 2-3. Like if they're at 4-1, everybody would be like, oh yeah, they're just playing really well. But the fact that they're 2-3 and we're having this conversation speaks to kind of where the division is right now and how everybody's kind of scuffling. And then, so how do you stack back-to-back games, right? Like
yes.
This is a team that hasn't done so in the Jonathan Gannon era. Now, they have in the sense of, you go back to last year, they beat the Falcons, lose a close one to Houston, right? And you go, oh, shucks. And then you beat the Eagles and you lose a close one to the Seahawks. You go, oh, shucks. But we talked about that, like the shucks close ones. We're kind of done with that right now. Like the Washington game was, all right, we've had enough of those. Like it's time to put up or shut up. Like even a loss to the San Francisco 49ers, if they would have lost that game, we wouldn't have been like, oh, shucks. We've been like, that's another strike against this group, because you have to start winning those games. I'm not going to go that far this week. It's a road game. It's an early game. Green Bay's trying to keep pace in the NFC North with a team in Minnesota that's just playing out of their minds. Let's be honest. Like nobody expected this. So there's a little desperation from the opponent's side of things.
Yeah.
But we want to see this team show up in a competitive nature, 2 consecutive games. And again, I'm not going to say it's must win, but it is, all right, show us that you're for real. Show us that you're a team that it's not like, oh crap, the bottom's about to fall out, we better play desperate. Play that way every week. And then,
right.
And then if you lose,
let's not be like the defense only plays well in the second half when they're down by 10 points or down by 13 points. Let's even that out a little bit. The offense should play well early and throughout. Maybe have a lull, but it is important offensively to play well early and late. But you can't have a 10-point, you can't have a 13-point deficit against this team, and against honestly anyone, and expect to come back and win.
Well, and that's why when I talked about last week's game, I was like, the Cardinals stole this one, and some people took exception to that. I'm like, I'm not saying anything negative about the Cardinals. It's very rare that you win a game that you trail by 10 or 13 points, right? Like it's not something that you see very often, and it's good for this group because, as we've said, they've had a lot of moral victories that we've been celebrating, and we're kind of getting to the point now where it's like, hey, you've used up all that goodwill, so let's start winning.
Let's start winning, especially if they can win this game, like that, the win last week over the 49ers made the next stretch of games look much more winnable. But sitting at 1-4 going into this week, had they gotten manhandled by the Commanders and the 49ers, we'd be staring down 1-7. But if you beat the 49ers, they can go into Green Bay and win. They're 3-3 and in first place now. Suddenly the Chargers don't look so tough. Suddenly the Chargers game doesn't look unwinnable, which we thought they were going to win anyway. The Miami game looks easier. The Bears game looks easier. The Jets game looks easier. That's a team that if they found themselves last week, they can go on a run, which it's not that they're not going to go on a run, but
yeah, we're not talking about a run through February, but we're talking about a run to January, which is what the goal has been from the outset with this group. Like, hey,
they should be relevant late. They should be relevant.
Exactly. Yeah, be relevant in January. Like, I don't even care if you win a playoff game. I don't even care if you make the playoffs. But if you're 8 or 9-6, or I guess 9-7 in week 18, and shucks, the morning games eliminated you, but you're like that game. We came into that week going, hey, if some things fall right, it could, like, that's where we want to be. We just don't want to be like, hey, it's Thanksgiving, and how about the NFL draft?
The draft. Mock draft season.
Right.
Oh.
So that's the big thing, I think, for this week. And I think it's, there's a chance that they can do this, but it really comes down to them.
So other player matchups, I'm excited to say. I'm guessing that we're going to see Jair Alexander on Marvin Harrison Jr. We're going to see. I mean, this isn't exciting, but it's going to be an important matchup. We're going to see Sean Murphy Bunting against Jaden Reed, which, I mean, Bunting's not been terrible, but he's also not been good. And aside from the one just egregious pass interference penalty that he had against Washington. But goodness, I mean, I want to see the Cardinals up front against Josh Jacobs. Do you know, is Matt LaFleur as likely to just go against numbers if they stack the box, or are they going to go to a pass? And which, by the way, something we didn't catch on the last show, and we talked about it, and it was 100% the case, because Jordan Mason didn't face a stacked box once, which simply means for us, either means one of two things, and I don't think it was the case. We'd have to go back and look at the film, the game tape for it. Either the Cardinals didn't stack the box, or when they did, the 49ers checked out of run plays in the pass, which would suggest the early passing that they did in the game that we know that Shanahan is willing to do. Like, you see, instead of trying to run against numbers, they'll pass against numbers. Like, that analytically, that makes sense. Is LaFleur as likely to do that, and can they force the issue with the pass game?
No, I mean, he's a little early in the game, I should say. He'll be a little more aggressive running the ball, even into a loaded box. The reality with him is he's not as patient as maybe Petzing will be, like they were last week, where they came out in the second half and just continue to run the ball, right? And you're like, wait a second, you're down by 13 or 10, you're running the ball every play? Or no, it was 13. You're running the ball every play. Like, what are you doing? So it'll be interesting, because they are aggressive running the football, and they like to get the ball in Josh Jacobs' hands, because he is a guy that deserves it. But there's a couple interesting things with Jacobs, right? Like, the first being that he only has one touchdown on the season, which is kind of wild for a guy with 90 touches. I mean, you think about this, he has 7 more carries than James Conner. Now, to be fair, he has 15 less carries than Jordan Mason, and you kind of mentioned it, right? Like, we were kind of taken aback by how much or how little they were willing to use Jordan Mason in that game. But then you look at it, there's his rushing rate success is right around 50%, which is about even with Connor. So again, they're willing to run into stacked boxes and make it work. The big thing is like if you get ahead, they're a team that will abandon the run to throw the football with Jordan Love, and that's I think where you want to get to with this group, right? Is more than anything is like force them to abandon the run and become one dimensional because the receivers aren't great.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Here podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about your favorite part. We're going to make predictions. We're going to talk about picks. We're going to talk about prop bets. That's coming next on Rise Up Here. We're back on the Rise Up Here podcast, Best Our Cardinals Talk on the web. Time for the final segment of the show. We're going to make our predictions, make some picks, make some predictions, and talk about our best bets for the props that are in this game. Which, by the way, before we get to the props, hey, props to our sports books. They have all of them. That normally, we're really limited on what we can talk about, but everything is on the table right now. But let's go prediction time. The Cardinals are 5-point underdogs. I honestly don't have a good feel for where this is. I don't have a good feel for the Packers. I don't have a good feel about where I think the Cardinals are for this game. And so I'm not going to predict the Cardinals win, but I'm going to presume that they'll be competitive, but I don't think it's going to be as high scoring as some might think. And so I'm predicting that it will be a 24-20, maybe 23-20 game that the Packers win. And the Cardinals, I don't know how it's going to go down, but ultimately that it'll just be another close loss.
Yeah, and this is a game where you'd like to see this team again stack a second solid performance and see how they come out of things. But the reality is, again, they're playing another desperate team on the road, early morning, in Wisconsin, not trying to make any excuses, just reality of the situation. So they're going to have to come out and play a better game than they did last week. While San Francisco is the better team out of all of these teams, the reality is they're going to need more if they want to compete and win this game. I'm with you. I think it's a close one. I don't think it's a blowout in any way on either side. I went 24-21 Green Bay.
Ooh, we're thinking the same. So we both like the Cardinals we both like the Packers to win. Not if you're betting the money line minus 250, you shouldn't do. But we do like the Cardinals to cover the +5 or the +4.5, depending on the sportsbook. BetMGM has +5, so you get a little bit extra room there, and the potential for a push. You also like the under in this game?
Yeah, I just don't trust either teams right now. So that's where I landed on this one.
Yeah, and that's like the Cardinals have had one really good offensive game, and then the other ones have been good start, lull, and maybe. I mean, the offense just hasn't been consistent enough. And so as much as we thought they'd be scoring 30 points a game, they just haven't been consistent enough. And so if this game is going to be close, I don't think it's going to be as high scoring. I don't think the Cardinals are consistent enough to do that. honestly, if you look at the Packers this year, their games haven't been gone that way either, because it's been, 16-10, 30-14. Now they had the high scoring 34-29 loss, the 31-29 loss, and a 24-19 win, which suggests if the Packers win, which like we're projecting, then you will see the under. And if the Packers lose, then we'll see the over. But we just don't trust the Cardinals that much this week.
Right, and that's just the reality. I mean, they haven't earned the trust yet. It's something that we want to see, and as we begin to actually see it, we'll get on board more, right? Like, we're not actively rooting against this team. It's just one of those things. It's like, haven't seen you show up for 2 games in a row and win 2 games in a row. Like
Right.
that, there's a difference between being competitive in 2 games in a row and winning 2 games in a row.
I think what would be a very reasonable, it's just normal odds minus 120. But if you want to go with a first quarter total, it's set at 9.5. Going over 9.5 or minus 120 based on the Cardinals' first quarter touchdown every week and the fact that they give up points. That seems like an easy bet to make.
My biggest one of this week is I'm all in on Jaden Reed of the Packers. I went over his stats with Jordan Love, and then he's coming off a down game. His over under 62.5 at minus 114. I would climb that ladder. I would go 62.5, and then I would go to 90, and then I would go up to 125. He's got 2 games where he's over 125 already this season. This is a great matchup. They're going to feed him an obnoxious amount of targets. That's the other thing that they do a lot of. So I like Reed's matchup this week, Jaden Reed. But definitely take the minus 114. Like I said, last week, 4 for 78. But he's got a 4 for 138 and a 7 for 139 this season with Jordan Love in the lineup.
And for easy little ladder, James Conner, I don't know what it is on FanDuel, but on BetMGM, they've got the over-under set at 69.5. You can go over minus 120. Now, on BetMGM, you can only go ladder on the alternate every 25, and so you got even money on 75 plus. Low risk type of thing there. Getting him to 75 yards seems easy. If you want to push him up to 100 plus, which I'll be honest, when it comes to betting props, James Conner has been my number one moneymaker over the last season and a half. So if you want to ladder that up to 100 plus, if for plus 275, I wouldn't blame you at all.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good one. The reality of this one is that the other one I like, and it's available right now, is I would ladder up both sides of that coin. So you have, if you parlay those two together, just their over under, so 66.5 for Jacobs, 71.5 for Connor, it's 260.
Ooh.
So just up that a little bit. You go to 80 for Jacobs, 90 for Connor. So yeah, a little more. You get plus 628. So
that's a nice one.
Yeah. So I think, and then if you want to throw a little bit, being the key word of money on both of them to rush for 100 plus yards, you get, it ends up being a plus 1600. So
Ooh.
I could see this being a game that's kind of sloppy in that sense of both teams running the football and taking advantage, but I like where Jess's head is at. We mentioned Jaden Reed, total receptions. He's over 5.5 plus 116. I would take that. Marvin Harrison is over 4.5 minus 102.
Oh, that's better. That's better because it's over 4.5 at minus 125. I'm at MGM, so FanDuel's the moneymaker there.
Yeah, and I'm taking that, and then I'm going to also parlay them both at 6 plus receptions.
Ooh.
I just feel like every time this is in the news or talked about, you get a game where Harrison's really kind of targeted. So I like those numbers.
Hasn't it been that way with the Cardinals offense all year? Is the talking point of the week leading up becomes the story of the next week?
100%, Jess, and that's why
I don't know. It's just people are smart, or if people outside the organization are smart, or if they're listening to what outside the organization. Because week one is like, they're not giving the ball to Marv. We need Marv. What does he do? What do they do? They get the 100-yard performance in a quarter. Washington with the lack of carries for Kyler Murray. What do? Second play from scrimmage, 50-yard run. So It'll be interesting because there hasn't been really. I mean, other than Harrison not being all that involved, that would make sense. How do you like this one? I don't know, but you got juicy plus 135 over 2.5 receptions for Connor.
Yeah, I like that. Let me see if that's available here. So over, yeah, he's not available on the receptions yet. It's just Reed, Harrison, and McBride right now on FanDuel. But I like that one, Jess.
And if we go, this will be interesting. You can go Tucker Kraft versus Trey McBride receiving yards. It's heavily in McBride's favor, minus 160. McBride's numbers have been pretty all right. But if you want to go with Kraft having more receiving yards than McBride, you get plus 120 odds there.
I like that. That's a good one too.
Oh, how about this one? Romeo Doubs versus Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson plus 120.
I do like that one quite a bit, especially get ahead of it right now, right?
Yeah. Then, yeah, I wouldn't do the Jade Reed versus Michael Wilson. No.
Yeah, exactly. Stay away from that one.
Well, it was minus 275 for Reed and plus 200 for Wilson. Well, that's fantastic. But you're also suggesting ladder him up to 125 yards. So, yeah. Don't do that. Let's look at the passing. So, Kyler Murray over 1.5 touchdown passes plus 145.
Where did my passing go? There they are, passing touchdowns. And he's plus 154 on FanDuel, so a little bit better. The interesting one is Jordan Love plus 2.5 or over 2.5 at plus 178. Now, we just talked about this. Josh Jacobs has and touchdown all season. So both of our numbers would indicate potentially 3 touchdowns, right? 24. Yeah. So where do those come from? That also would indicate to you to stay away from Josh Jacobs' anytime touchdown number at minus 125 because he's got one on the season. So now, that being said, is this not a game where you could see him
scoring twice? Especially since what are the Cardinals going to try to do? They're really going to limit they're really going to try and just eliminate the over-the-top throws.
So that's an interesting one for the passing props because basically what they're saying is they don't run for touchdowns, but they really do think it's going to happen in this game, right? So I like the Kyler number. I don't like the Love number, even though we both think that they're going to score about 3 touchdowns. I do think Jacobs gets on the board this week.
Nice. If you want here's one that's worth because we've seen it happen twice. Elijah Higgins plus 900. That because of the attention that McBride gets and other guys get, we've seen it now twice. Kyler's found him twice in the end zone this year. And with plus 900 odds, that's never a bet. Stay away from Chris Moore. Oh, Chris Moore is on here. For crying out loud. He's not even on the team. But plus 900 at Elijah Higgins wouldn't, for me, throw a couple of bucks on that and see what happens.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and the last one I like, going back to it, is the player pass attempts. It's really high for Love, 35.5. So if you think that the Cardinals can get out ahead, then that's a number you want to grab because 35.5 at plus money is a number you would want to grab. Again, this is attempts, not completions. So over 35.5, I would venture to say the under hits this week, but if you think that the Cardinals can get out ahead this week, knowing how Matt LaFleur does things, if they do get behind, then that's a number to keep an eye on.
And for the kicking props aren't worth looking at because they don't have anything for the Cardinals. You can go with Braden Narvison over 1.5 field goals made, that's minus 110. There's nothing special there. But yeah, neither Prater nor Ryland are there. So keep an eye on that. If you can get if you get plus money on over 1.5 field goals on Sunday morning for Prater or Ryland, that's always a good one to do.
Yeah, anytime you can get the Cardinals with 2 field goals, you got to do it.
And with that, anything else, Seth, that you want to bring up in terms of the bets that we can make?
Not right now. I'm waiting to see a couple more lines drop. But like you, I like what we have right now. There's some really juicy plays that I think we can exploit this week.
Awesome. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. The best of Cardinals talk on the web is episode 601. We'll be back again next week. We'll be able to talk about what happens in the Packers game. So hopefully we can line up 3 shows. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to talk to Gavino Borges from the Chargers Wire as we have that Monday night game, the Monday night JV game. We'll talk about that game next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.